Hello, garden people! Welcome to another episode of Fresh from the Garden. I'm your host, Reed, with my friend Michael, and we're here to bring you a nice May 12th. I always forget the date, but early May, mid-May. And you can see that the garden is going great. I think it's been since last fall since we made a video, or at least late last season. So you can see right away, we're in the back side of the garden. One minor setback we had during the winter is that a car was probably doing donuts on the snow and smashed into the gate. So the front gate is no longer a thing. But in general, the garden has continued to grow and evolve, and I think it's a really good state of being. So first off, you can see my perennial favorite. This is the Tundra honeyberry, and you can see it's about as tall as I am at this point, at least a couple of the branches. It's completely loaded with berries, always one of the first bloomers. I am trying to do some tip layering this year, so you can see down here where when the stem was dormant, I would just kind of stick it in the soil, and hopefully it'll root out. For legal purposes, this is not a Tundra honeyberry. This is a completely unnamed, non-patented variety. So your mileage may vary. But you can see things are going really well. The rhubarb is coming into full flower. This is the first year that I'm actually letting it flower because I really want to give more pollinator space. I've seen a few bees on it, and it has an incredibly lung-like shape, very bronchial bifurcation pattern going to what look like arterioles and alveoli. It's kind of a beautiful plant. And you can see, I think I showed this in last year's video, but I've started to make more of an intentional meadow in the middle of the so-called food forest. And you can see that this is largely annual space, and annual including the walking onions, which are actually perennial. But you can see a lot of lettuces, the spinach is coming in really well. You can still see the little bit of dew from overnight. There's quite a bit of lamb's quarters, which is actually sort of by design. Every year I sprinkle a couple of the big ones so that it's sort of a weed, but it's also edible. Especially at this season, or this time of the season, looked a little bit earlier. Super good. And so I figure you're gonna get weeds no matter what. You might as well try to plant the weeds you like. So I've been coming with my hand scythe and chopping it, so this section's been chopped a couple times. The trees have actually started to fruit quite a bit. So early season, both of the apricots started to flower. And the one over here actually did set fruit. We got dinged by one last late frost. There's always, plants are sensitive. So if we get down into the high 20s, mid 20s especially, starts killing off most of the fruit buds. So it's a race between trying to maximize the weather and maximize the season, but not go too early or else the tree loses its crop. So overall tree health is quite good, but it did lose its fruits. That's okay though. If we look, the peach tree again, the mother of, I don't know, 20 or 200 fruits probably last year, is actually flowering again this year. So this tree got incredibly damaged just by the rigors of the season. And so you can see here where 1, 2, and then I actually had to remove this branch because it was in my way, broke off. And so I'm really happy to see that it's sending up adventitious shoots from the stem. And this will help give this portion of the trunk more energy to repair itself. So hopefully this callus is over and potentially gets more branches lower down. But you can see it's actually fruiting. They're just now starting. I don't want to bend it too much, but this here you can start to see it fatten up. So I think at least the majority of these will make peaches, which is pretty incredible. It also has given rise to one of my favorite things of this season so far, where last year I probably harvested about 50 peaches. The raccoons probably harvested about 150, and they obviously don't care about where the pits fall. So there was pits scattered everywhere around in the garden. I didn't think too much about it, but I kind of, you know, in the fall I often rake up the wood chips a little bit to bring in fresh ones, get the bigger ones off to the side. And so I noticed that they started having tons and tons of sprouts. So you can actually see one that I haven't gotten to move yet. This is a peach seedling. So this is the Reliance Peach. I'm calling this a Reliance, R-E-L-I-O-N-S peach. And I've been potting them up. So if you look over here, I've got probably 7 or so. 7 peaches in this pot. We got another 10 or 15 over there, a couple in other pots, been giving them to people. So the reason this is exciting is that this is the first fruit tree volunteer I found in the garden. There's plenty of volunteer lettuces and cilantro and parsley and things like that that I find every year. But this is the first actual tree that I've gotten. In addition, Michael, if you look right behind your foot, this is, I believe, that these are seedling honeyberries. So last year I built a little bed that I was trying to make softwood cuttings of honeyberries. I don't really have the misting set up, and I looked into what it would take to do with solar pumps and whatnot, and it's basically not possible. You really need city water pressure to get a misting set up. So I instead fermented a few honeyberries, basically just same style of tomatoes, where you let the fruit pulp marinate for 3-ish days, and it starts to decompose a little bit, makes a more acidic environment. It sort of mimics the digestion cycle to some extent, and put the seeds over in the potting mixtures over there. So then this spring, the tiniest little seedlings started coming up, and I noticed that they had vague honeyberry-like characteristics, and they were in the spot that I put the seeds in the first place. So I transplanted them up, and if you look closely, I think, you know, the overall coloration, when the honeyberries first leaf out, they have sort of this coppery tone. They're very fuzzy, and overall the relatively oval leaf shape seems reminiscent. So I would say at this point I'm at least 90% sure that these are actually honeyberry seedlings and not just some other weed that I've been nurturing. Although if that turns out, it's okay. But potentially very exciting, and we've already named the first two. It'll be Princess Ballerina and Squeepy after Anna and my cats. So there's 3 more. Comment down below if you'd like to potentially offer a name for the other 3 varieties. We'll get some new honeyberry varieties going. So that's very exciting. I will say I've also started to notice in past years I've put various native trees that have come up as support species, and I'm largely, this would be sort of a low pollard. So there's different ways to sustainably harvest trees. Obviously you could just do a clear cut, you know, and then replant, or in a lot of systems around the world historically, people have cut the trunks either at the ground level, which is a coppice, or at a higher level, basically above animal browsing height, and then just keep regrowing shoots like that. And so this is some sort of hybrid of both, basically trying to maximize the light flow to the peach seedling, while still getting some amount of maple. I think this is a silver maple, and this is a mulberry. It's probably a white mulberry in that there's a white mulberry right there. And so, although there is a red mulberry, which is our native species on the far side of the garden. So at this point, I'm not sure. Either way, fine with me. They're all edible. But for insects, which is really one of the main goals I have here, you can see that there's some sort of galling insect forming on these leaves. And you might be like, Reed, why would you want to encourage an insect eating your plants? Well, obviously, if there's too much damage on my fruit trees, that's not an ideal situation, but having the diversity of different kinds of trees, I think helps mitigate that. I mean, you can see there's a few leaf cutter, I think that circle is from a leaf cutter bee. They usually make a pretty perfect circle, but that's perfect. Actually, there's a phrase in regenerative agriculture. It's like, well, if your leaves have holes, you've got a healthy ecosystem or something to that effect. Very catchy. And so I like seeing these host species that I really only have for diversity's sake. I don't really, and maybe I'll get pulls out of it or something, but essentially it's just ideological. I like the diversity of species here. And so I believe that the roots are probably talking to the trees in some capacities in the soil organisms, but it's a nice visible representation that there's other life utilizing the species. In the same extent, I've been finding out this year that there are different kinds of elms in Iowa. I mean, I think I knew this somehow in my head. Obviously the American elm is largely gone. There's a few examples, but there's like slippery elms and fork elms and all sorts of stuff, which is confusing because they also kind of look like hackberries when they're young. So I'm still learning all the different species, and I'm not entirely sure which species this is, but you can see some more galls. From what I can tell, this is probably an aphid gall of some sort, and there's some more down here. But it's perfect, because once again, this is just a tree that started growing up inside of the fence row. And it's not that I'm even particularly promoting it. I've chopped it down several times. You can see like the tips are extensively chewed back. You can see here I've pulled it off not particularly carefully and it's calloused over. So this is a tree that I'll continue to chop down, but I don't actually care about killing it, because at this level, where it's not really out competing the gooseberry, it's not out competing the grapes, it's just adding a bit more diversity that some sort of species is using, which I think is really fun. So those are some of the species that I've just kind of put in and around. You can see other fun things. So in this meadow section, I overwintered some kale. And so kales are biennial crops. And so if you look at the genetics of kales, turnips, broccoli, cauliflower, I'm probably missing some of the other ones. They're all the same species. They've just been bred in very different ways. And so if you actually ever see a broccoli flower, it has basically the same little flowers. They're just much more clustered. And if you look down here, that's just basically a little broccoli. And if you eat it, it tastes exactly like broccoli, just a smaller piece. So this is exciting because, I'd say probably about half the kale plants I had here overwintered, and I kind of covered them with leaves a little bit to give them a little bit more protection during the winter. And now it's flowering, so hopefully I can get some seed, and then I'll have a my own seed variety that a land race, if you will. Although I'm not sure if one generation represents a land race, but it's kind of fun. And you can eat the leaves still. They're not, at this point, they're not bitter. I'm assuming once it continues to flower,